Annie was an ordinary girl who lived near the dark forest. She was curious and always wanted to explore the world around her. One day, after hearing about the secrets of the forest, Annie decided to go on a night adventure. Dressed in her warm jacket and with the lantern in her hands, she went into the depths of the dark forest. At first, everything seemed fascinating and exciting. She watched the stars, listened to the sound of the wind and enjoyed the peace of nature. But as she moved deeper into the forest, the atmosphere began to change. The wind began to whistle, the trees were leaning in a strange direction, and a feeling of anxiety gripped Anna. But she didn't think about the stories being told, because she was sure that nothing bad would happen. As Anna moved deeper into the forest, she noticed that the sounds of nature were becoming more ominous. Rustling and gnashing of branches filled the air, as if the forest was awakening to life. She could feel a vague anxiety being born inside her, but she still hoped for her safety. Suddenly, the lantern in her hand began to shake, and the light became less bright. Unusual shadows glided among the trees. It seems that something is watching Anna from the darkness. She felt naked and vulnerable, realizing that the forest was keeping its secrets. The trees became denser. A dense network of branches formed between them, like a trap entangling her path. But Anna didn't give up. She resolutely continued on her way, determined to find out what lurks in the depths of this gloomy forest. With every step she took, she felt the cold humidity seeping through her jacket, as if washing her with fear. The forest became more and more closed, and every moment Anna felt that now she was not alone. As Anna moved deeper into the forest, the surrounding atmosphere became more and more overwhelming. The sounds of nature turned into gloomy screeches, as if the forest itself was making its moans and screams. Anna's heart began to beat faster, and her footsteps faded away, disappearing into the infinity of trees. Suddenly, the lantern in her hand stopped shining, enveloping her in darkness. A strange and incomprehensible silence enveloped the forest, like a living void. Anna felt a ghostly presence on her, as if she was surrounded by invisible eyes studying her every step. The trees grew darker and darker, as if they were eager to swallow her into their arms. The branches reached out to her like skeletons ready to grab onto her flesh. The network of branches was shrinking, forming a maze from which there was no way out. With each step, shifting forward became more difficult. Anna felt the cold seeping through her jacket, as if the icy fingers of the forest were penetrating into her very being. Now she was completely naked in front of this gloomy and hostile environment. Distorted laughter rang out in the distance, slowly turning into hysterical laughter. The sound bounced off the trees and disappeared into the darkness. Anna realized that she had become a part of this place, trapped in its abyss. Her screams were drowned in silence. Suddenly, ghostly figures began to rise from the ground. They were distorted and withered, covered with rot and moss. Huge black crows sat on their shoulders, emitting shrill cries that broke the dead silence. Annie was stunned with horror, seeing how the ghosts were approaching her. They seemed faceless, their faces distorted by suffering and grief. The cold hands of touch slowly descended on her shoulders, and their voices, filled with eternal sadness, echoed in the air. Suddenly, the ghosts began to pronounce her name, whisper her fate. They told stories about those who dared to disturb the peace of the forest, and they paid the price for their curiosity. The words were piercing and terrible. They described painful deaths and eternal suffering. Anna tried to run away, but the maze of branches became even denser, entangling her in his arms. Her screams remained unanswered, lost in the infinity of the forest. Not a single person heard her desperate call for help. All Anna's attempts to escape were in vain. The forest, as if it had found its own will, actively prevented her escape. The branches twisted, forming thorny loops that clung to her clothes and skin, leaving deep wounds. Each attempt to free herself only increased the confusion and infinity of the maze in which she was trapped. The ghosts kept talking to Annie, drowning out her own thoughts more and more. Their words penetrated her mind, penetrating into the very depths of her being. They described the terrible torments and sufferings that await her if she does not accept her fate and stays here. among the ghosts and the dead. Ghostly torches flashed around her, illuminating the dark scenes of past tragedies. She saw the agony and suffering of those who had previously tried to escape from this cursed forest. The shadows of the souls of exhausted victims came to life before her eyes, and she understood that if she did not accept her fate, she would become one of them. Anna tried to resist, but every moment the strength left her body. Her cries for help were fading, becoming just a ghost of herself. The maze of branches swallowed her up, and she lost all hope of salvation. Finally, Anna fell to her knees, resigned to her fate. The ghosts surrounded her, and their icy hands of touch sank into her flesh. She accepted her fate, becoming an immortal ghost, cursed to wander in this forest forever. As Anna became an immortal ghost, her torment only intensified. She was chained to this gloomy forest, unable to leave it for a single step. Every night she wandered among the shadows, cursing her fate and wishing to be free from eternal torment. She saw other ghosts, those who were alive before, but succumbed to the magic of the forest. They suffered and darted around her, their shadows disappearing into the darkness, only to reappear and continue their endless journey. Spewing silent screams and frozen eyes, they reminded of the pain and horror that haunted them in the world of the living. Anna tried to find a way out of this hellish maze, but all her efforts were in vain. The forest disrupted her every attempt, plunging her into the depths of its evil and dark essence. She could hear their whispers, echoes of pain and suffering that filled every corner of this cursed place. Sometimes, on the darkest nights, Anna saw a reflection of her past life. She saw her family and friends crying over her loss. They could not hear her pleas for help, and their tears turned into impotent drops, dissolving into darkness. Now she was just a shadow of herself, trapped in this ruthless forest. Her essence penetrated into his depths, becoming part of his anger and fear. Every step, every moment was saturated with suffering and longing that knew no end. And so, Annie and the rest of the ghosts remained in this cursed forest, forever doomed to wander forever. Their stories became just small drops in the ocean of horror that permeated every corner of this gloomy place.